Welcome to the Trauma Preventative Health Podcast, hosted by the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association. We provide you with up-to-date information on health topics geared towards the Orthodox Jewish community. This podcast content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice or as a substitute for the medical advice of a physician.
Welcome to the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, or JOMA podcast. I'm your host, Elisa Minkin. I'm a general pediatrician, and I'm really excited and honored to be here today with Elisheva Liss, finally. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Yes, thank you for finally doing this with me. Elisheva Liss, LMFT, is a psychotherapist in private practice, an author, lecturer, and digital educator. Her book, Find Your Horizon of Healthy Thinking, teaches how to use a narrative therapy technique she developed for managing challenging thoughts, feelings, and circumstances. Her primary digital course is Sacred, Not Secret, a religious parent's guide to healthy, holy sexuality education. Some of her other courses are Private Practice Pro Tips, how to make the most of your therapy experience, and So You Might Want to Homeschool. Most of her content, including her blog, can be found on elishevaliss, with 2 S's.com. She can be reached at speaktosomeone@gmail.com to ask about private or couple sessions, consultation services, teleconferences, or live events. So I do have to say that this talk is for mature audiences. It contains sensitive topics, and it may be triggering for some. So I know we planned originally to talk about the Find Your Horizon of Healthy Thinking, and we're going to have to incorporate it somehow. But because of recent events, I'm referring to the Chaim Walder scandal. There's been a lot of talk about keeping our kids safer, preventing child sex abuse. And I feel like we're making some progress, but I think that there are things that we should be talking about more, I think. I think there is a little confusion, and I'd love to hear what you were thinking and some of your ideas, because I've read all your blog posts on this topic. So I'm going to give you the floor. Let you talk.
Okay. What more can we be doing? There's always more that we can be doing in, so many areas when it comes to safety and health and mental health and education. These are such vital topics and areas of communal development, family development, personal development. And the world is changing,
Right.
The world is changing in leaps and bounds, and we're all just trying to keep up with it. And I think the generation gap is wider than it's ever been, which is a huge challenge for, parents and educators. And I think also the gap between the predominant secular zeitgeist and communities that are trying to adhere to varying degrees of tradition and values is widening also. And that creates a lot of confusion and a lot of tension, just between communities, within communities, between generations, between institutions and families. And, when we try to tackle such a delicate and sensitive topic, like sexual abuse prevention, which to me, we've talked about this, you and I know that I think we're on the same page about this, that in order for it to be done in a healthy, effective way, it needs to be embedded in a broader sexual education curriculum. And I don't even really love the word curriculum. I almost feel like it's more than a curriculum. When we talk about, let's say, teaching our children, to, let's say, self-worth, right? Self-esteem. We don't talk about a self-worth or self-esteem curriculum, right? It's an ethos, it's something that we want to just nourish every part of how we parent and educate. We just want to constantly be feeding our kids like an IV drip of, you can do this. We believe in you. We value you. Can work hard. You can achieve. You can learn new strengths and abilities and skills and knowledge and apply them and make a difference in the world. It's not a curriculum. It's a doctrine. It's what we believe in. Right. And I think that, part of that value system of trying to inculcate children and teens and young adults and ourselves with the confidence that we can actualize and we can contribute and we can strive to become our best selves includes an ethos and a messaging around sexuality, around our bodies, around relationships, around having the confidence to know what's okay and not what's not okay, and appropriate contexts for different kinds of touch and dialogue and really relating to other people. And so I think that when some well-meaning systems, families, parents, educators try to isolate the issue of sexual abuse as kind of its own topic, and they kind of come all in with this like one-time conversation or program, it's going to be grossly inadequate, and it's going to also be almost grotesque in its distortion of what sex is, because, when there's no sexual education of any kind going on, so that creates one set of problems. When you only have sexual education about negative, traumatic, dangerous sexual experience, then in a way, it's almost worse, because then, it doesn't necessarily prevent, because, it still creates a little bit of a stigma and a lot of discomfort around people being able to come forward when they have concerns. And then when people get to the age where we want them to be able to engage in a healthy way, in an intimate relationship, all they have is this negative messaging. And I see it in my practice. Anyone who specializes in couples therapy, and particularly in the sexual realm, is like bursting at the seams in terms of people wanting to come and talk to them about their sexual problems. And a lot of times by the way, I'm just talking. You could just jump in and interrupt me at any time.
Since you gave me a moment to speak, yes, because I love what you're saying, and it's also important. I'm thinking how important it is to start with you, because our kids pick up on our discomfort. So if we're not comfortable talking about it, they will know, and they will not come to us or talk to us about it. And first of all, that's part of the problem with just focusing on the personal safety. It's very hard not to convey anxiety about it, right? Unless you yourself are comfortable. So I'm glad you brought up people going for help with their own, questions about sexuality, because this is a change that I think is happening now in all of our areas of Orthodox Judaism. That is so positive.
Yeah. And I don't even know, I'm so grateful that it's happening in the Orthodox world, but I actually think it's a mirror of what's happening in the world at large. I think the sexual revolution started in sort of the 50s and 60s, and there's a socio-political movement that goes along with that. But beyond that, there's a human development, a global human development around sort of bridging the gap between the hush-hush and the reality that, humans are sexual creatures. All organisms, most organisms are sexual creatures, and, that has to become something that we can educate ourselves about, so that we can engage in the healthiest version of intimate relationships that we can. And I love that you highlighted the point of, it starts with ourselves. I think you mentioned at the beginning, I created a course on culturally sensitive, for religious families and communities, sex education. And there was this one section that I did not as an afterthought, but I didn't think it was going to be a main section. And it was called something like, I think, Begin with Ourselves, or Learning from Our Own Experiences, something like that. And I went through maybe maybe a dozen or so, 15 to 20 questions to ask yourself. And, it's kind of a journaling challenge, just kind of think about what you experienced, growing up, and your relationship to your body. And if you're in a intimate relationship, what that's like for you. And it just goes to show, we can't always predict what even our own work is going to, elicit from people. And most of the modules in the course have video content. This one doesn't have video content. It's literally just a whole stream of text, asking questions. And I have gotten the most poignant emails about that section. People saying how it felt like a kind of really intensive therapy session, that they did it with a partner, and they were sitting and crying and sharing things they'd never shared before, that they had real breakthroughs just kind of working through these questions. And it was so humbling and gratifying to hear that there was sort of a stage on which these really important conversations could play out for parents. And, this is such a classic parent thing that we often do, which is we don't necessarily take care of ourselves, but when it comes to our children, we're more likely to go that extra mile. Right, we'll put off going to our own dental cleaning, right, but we'll get to make sure the kid gets there, right? Which isn't necessarily a healthy thing, but it's sort of like a parental instinct, I think. And so I think a lot of parents are much more motivated to take the time, make the investment to say like, okay, I'm going to learn about healthy sex ed because like, I don't want my children to, be at risk for childhood sexual abuse. I don't want my children to be not prepared for when they're at the right age and stage to start having, sexual relationships, emotional, intimate relationships. I want them to be prepared for marriage. So they'll do that. And then in so doing, they'll sort of discover parts of themselves that never got nourished along the way. And so that was like a really cool thing that I learned. And then I started to notice that a lot of the people who were engaging with the blog posts that I write on this and this course and, the material that I try to put out there in a religiously sensitive tone, some of the messages I was getting were people who were not parents. Some of them were not married. They were just people who wanted to re-educate their own inner child and say like, this is a really big part of life. It's an important part of life. And it's an important part of Torah, like it's not something that the Torah shies away from. It's not something that the Gemara shies away from. It's something that contemporary culture shies away from. And being able to reclaim this area of education is, I think, so critical. And it's really so healing for individuals and for relationships.
Right. And I think that it's really important to stress that your program is sensitive, for the frum family. I think it's meant for all religious families, not even just necessarily Jewish families. And I think we all in religious communities face the same problem, is that, like you said, our world has changed so rapidly, right? Yeah. And you can't just use material that's not written for frum families. For most of us would feel that way, right?
Totally.
I think it's also understandable for people to say, well, I'm going to just shut it all out. I want to make sure
I think that's what's happened, and I think there's sort of like a Hegelian, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, a process where the pendulum swings. We see as the right gets more extreme, the left gets more extreme. As the left gets more extreme, the right gets more extreme. And these, socio-political and religious extremes that exist now, I think are more polarized than ever before. And there's just like this, like, yin-yang situation going, and the nuance, the moderation, the ability to talk about things in even keel is becoming sort of an endangered species. And I think sex is just sort of one of the one of the collateral damages of topics that have become sort of extreme on both ends. So there's no shortage of material for sex education out there, like in the internet and books and videos. But a lot of it is written from a very leftist perspective, which a lot of right-wing religious families are just not going to be comfortable with. And so let's say, again, and just to use my course as an example, although there's some wonderful, books and a handful of other things written also from Orthodox perspective, although not a lot.
Very little.
So, one of them we talk about imparting values. Right. So an example that I often give is, when I was growing up, I grew up in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, and we were the only Orthodox family in our building, probably on our block. But my peers who were growing up in the 80s and 90s with me, who were, let's say the same age, these were kids who, they went to these good public schools or Christian or prep schools in the neighborhood, right? None of them were probably going to be, let's say, engaging in premarital sexual relationships. Like that was the norm for that generation. By the time, let's say 5 years later, if you were in college and you weren't sexually active, it was because you were just like a really religious person. It was an anomaly, right? Like you had to have a really good excuse, and so that's what I mean by the gap between the dominant, general secular culture, and the culture, religious culture, being wider and wider. And then the religious culture developing a phobia around sort of utilizing some of the knowledge and the wisdom and the science, from a more, left-wing, far left perspective, saying, well, but that doesn't honor our values. And so what I've tried to do is try to take from the psychological, findings and literature and data that we have, including sexology and, including, more of an understanding of what people need to hear growing up, independent of cultural issues, respecting cultural issues, but just bodies are bodies, right? And they develop. It doesn't matter what language you speak growing up, you're going to get your period. You're going to, right? Things are going to happen. There's a certain universality to this, and being able to sort of create space to say we can use language that feels that honors our values, and we can impart our values in a way that's gentle and respectful, but open and honest and clear. and is very unequivocal about things like abuse and boundaries, and safety, and also garners from primary Jewish sources very sex positive messaging, because, my belief is that there is a lot of very sex positive messaging in the primary sources, in the Chumash and the Gemara and the Rishonim. The whole Shir HaShirim is, a love song. And I think in more contemporary times, there's been like a Christian influence on a lot of the messaging about abstinence. It's a lot of abstinence education, a lot of modesty education, a lot of like don't do, don't touch, don't think about, and not as much education on the positivity and the beauty and the holiness of, and that's why I call it sacred, not secret, because it's sacred. There's actually a really nice book I want to mention, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's called A Marital Intimacy by Rabbi Avraham Peretz Friedman. He put together a lot of sex positive Torah sources. And it reads like a shir. But it's, I've recommended it to so many people who have told me that they grew up religious. They followed a lot of religious rules around modesty and sexuality and, keeping genders very separate. And then they got married and they're just like, what? I feel like I have to throw 20 years of education out the window and just go against everything I was already taught literally overnight. And they could read this book and it kind of bridges that gap and says, no, the same Torah that you were learning all these years actually says all these really beautiful, encouraging, positive things about intimacy, sexuality, marriage, bodies, but that's not taught enough. So part of what my kind of mission is to bring a little bit more of this education in the language of Torah, of spirituality, of godliness, into the dialogue before, the Chassan and Kala classes,
Right. So that's what I really want to talk about, because I think everybody understands that once you're married, we're expecting you, right, to be intimate. And, it's great that there's much more openness about going to a sex therapist. There's a hotline, I need Dodi. This is all great. But I think the expectation is still, pretty much across the board in Orthodox circles, that we're not going to talk about it before you're about to get married.
Yeah.
At all.
So I think it just depends which Orthodox circles you're talking about. I've seen the extreme of that where I actually have a draft of a blog post that I want to write about this, where you have young women from very, very sheltered communities who will literally say, like, they went to a Kala class a couple weeks before the wedding, and that was the first they learned of like what penetrative intercourse is. Right. And they panicked, they freaked out, they cried, and it was so traumatic for them. And if they can't sort of like figure out, kind of get okay with that. And it's so sad to have to like get okay with something that's supposed to be so wonderful and pleasurable. But if they can't sort of like get comfortable with that by the time they get married within the next few weeks, then it ends up being a torture for both spouses, honestly, because you have this, this young woman who just found out this like harsh reality that she should have been told a long time ago. And they kind of like withheld it. And I'm not villainizing any one individual person. Like sometimes these are really loving parents and really, otherwise caring, giving, nurturing communities. But it's just this norm that developed that is so unhealthy. And so these young women are going into marriage terrified, like, kind of like shaking. And the young men are also, nervous because they don't want to hurt their new Kala. Like that's a terrible feeling.
And I think it goes back even further than that, because within these same circles, and we're not vilifying, obviously different communities will have different community norms, and any education or change that happens is going to happen within the context of those communal norms.
Sure. Yeah.
Is to not even use body part names.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you also have to be, comfortable with your body parts. There's 100%. A lot of other pieces, not just knowing, the actual mechanics.
I actually vacillate on that issue because there's a part of me that wants to just encourage everyone to use exactly biologically, anatomically correct information, body parts, language, verbiage. To me, that feels real, that feels true, that feels correct. I don't mean crass street words. I mean, like the kind of words that are accurate to the body. Although I have to say that I think it is important in some communities for kids to know the crass street language also, because that way when they hear it, they know what they're dealing with and they don't end up looking silly in front of their peers or being tricked into using it. There's stories like that also, but I don't want to get sidetracked with that. But then there was another part of me that kind of felt like in order to be able to honor the different communities and cultures and sensitivities that we're dealing with, there might need to be sort of a meeting place. And so what I sometimes will tell certain families, like when I'm trying to help them move towards a, more open, honest education and conversation around sex, is I'll say, look, if you don't feel comfortable, saying the word penis and you have a different word you want to say aver, if you have like a Hebrew or a Yiddish or a euphemistic equivalent, but it's clear and it's specific for this body part and you use it consistently, then I guess that would be like a runner-up option. But your child should know that there's another word for it because they're going to hear it at some point.
Should know. See, I'm glad we're talking about this because this is a conversation I had with a Hasidic therapist. In her community, they do not use the anatomical names. And some people have actually within that community taught their children, and it's been a problematic, sort of the inverse of children who don't know the street names.
Yeah.
Right? It's not appropriate in those communities, but I'm glad you're pointing out that they should still know the names.
Yeah.
Of those parts.
That's my opinion.
I think so too. I mean, the problem is, and we actually had this conversation on an Instagram Live and people had chimed in, no, you must use the correct body part names.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a sex abuse prevention model, you have to use the correct body part names. They need to know it so that if chas v'shalom something happens, they can tell you what it is that, otherwise it's, that's a problem.
Yeah. And another challenge of euphemism is that it communicates something, subliminally, if there's a part of your body that's like so off limits that we can't even refer to it in an accurate way, then, there are actual stories of, people who had a UTI or a yeast infection, they had like real medical issues that didn't get attended to in a timely way because they were just too uncomfortable and awkward to talk about it. I've even heard a couple of stories of women who got their young, girls who got a period and like were just kind of stuffing toilet paper in there just because they didn't know like how to request help. And these sound like extreme stories and they are extreme stories, but they're not as uncommon as one might hope. So yeah. And again, like when you talk about Hasidic, culture, so there's so much beauty and chesed and tremendous, Ahavas Yisrael that happens in a lot of these communities. However, when it comes to this area, and there's also a lot of growth, by the way. So many people who contact me are members of Hasidic communities who are trying to make a huge difference, both in sex abuse prevention and also, the couples who they were those 19-year-old terrified chassan and kalas and they want to save their children from the same fate, but they don't want to flaunt, they don't want to be rebellious within their communities. They're really kind of struggling and trying to figure stuff out. And I have so much admiration for these, young Hasidic thinkers who are trying to do this. But like I've been told by some of my Hasidic clients, like they a lot of them won't say the word pregnant, because that also is like very, so again, this is the challenge of trying to walk that tightrope of honoring communities and also protecting and educating the individuals within the communities and recognizing that communities are comprised of individuals. And so just because something's cultural doesn't mean that it's going to be moral or healthy, and sort of like really walking that delicate balance of trying to figure it out. And I think another really nice piece of it is working with leadership. So a number of years ago, I had a really nice experience where I was invited to Brooklyn to speak to a group of Kala teachers who were some from the Hasidic community, some from the Yeshivish community, all, a few clicks to the right of, where I, was raised and aligned. But I was really grateful to have the chance to talk with them, meet them. And one of the things that I was discussing with them is how vital their role as educators is, because so many of the young women who come to them, you're the first address that they come to for sex education. And so this is almost like a one-shot deal, which, I don't believe that that's what it should be, but once it is, we want to do it as well as possible. And these women were so empathetic and so humble. And they were like, we understand that, we recognize that, but we ourselves weren't necessarily given the education that, that we would have wanted. And we don't necessarily have like the confidence and the language and the clarity to give over, what these young women need. And one of them says to me, Elisheva, would you consider writing something up for us? And I said, absolutely, I would. So I went home and I wrote up like a 10-page single-space document, a script for college teachers that are really it's geared for kala teachers who are teaching sheltered kalas. It could be used for, anyone that is, going to do an Orthodox observant marriage, but it would, that's the tone. And I sent it out to these kala teachers, and I just said, listen, anyone else who teaches kalas who wants this, let me know and I can send it to them. And I got so many messages and phone calls asking for this document. And so, then there were people who were asking for it who were, 12th grade teachers and moms of girls that were marriageable age. And I was just like, you know what? Anyone who is over 18 that wants this should just have it. And I ended up automating it. I wrote a blog post about it. And it's a free document. The only reason I don't publish it on my blog is because it does reference the NIDA laws. And I just feel like, in this day and age of rabid anti-Semitism, I like to be careful about what I post publicly about things like that. But anyone who can access it through their knowledge of, some degree of halacha and, affiliation with Jewish community can just click on that link and get it. And, that's something that I was really grateful to be able to, be a part of, because I think it's just part of this broader, movement, recognizing what's missing and trying to fill in these gaps.
Right. And in a way that's appropriate for that particular community. It's really beautiful that you did that. And I think there's more and more Hasidic professionals. There's a lot more mental health professionals in the Hasidic world who know the norms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think this is going to happen more and more. I want to go back a little bit and say, so before the Kala classes, even, in all circles, what do you think we should be doing? Because it shouldn't start there. I mean, it might vary by the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So, I think one of the most common questions that I get on my social media or after lectures is, at what age do you teach kids about sex? What's the optimal age to teach? And, to me, it's so much broader than that. I don't think there's one magical age. I don't think there's one big bomb conversation. And I don't think that, and I think there's so much more to sexuality education than, telling people, how babies are made, telling kids how babies are made, or, what you do with your genitals. I think that, sexuality is whole body and heart and mind. And it's about, there's language, there's relationships, there's touch, there's development. And sometimes I joke, sex education begins in infancy, when a mother bonds with her babies, right? That feeling of, that oxytocin touch that they both experience is the beginning, that is the chinuch of hey, when someone you love holds you, that feels really good. Because touch and connection, it's not either platonic, it's not binary. It's not either platonic or romantic or, or G-rated or erotic. There's a whole spectrum of what relationships and touch feel like. And we know this from the progression, let's say the progression from play. Foreplay is now a word that we're not supposed to say anymore. But because again, this is a great example of how sex has become so politicized, right? Because foreplay implies that there's a different stage of that intercourse is the only kind of sexual activity. But I'm still comfortable using the word foreplay.
Okay. I never heard that, but okay.
Yes. In the sex therapy community, they're don't say foreplay anymore because that implies that it's less important. It's it's okay. Anyway, we have to discuss the politics of sex, but, but I think, let's say and this a lot of young couples don't necessarily know. So you have let's say just to use gender stereotypes, which aren't always true, but they're often true. So let's say, sometimes the men will move much more quickly, from, hey, we just, lock the door to the bedroom to, let's do, genital pleasuring and, and have intercourse. Whereas a lot of times the young women are wait, no, let's talk, let's cuddle, let's rub each other's backs, let's touch each other in ways that are more sort of playful and affectionate, and then move on to the sensual and the erotic. And this is all part of education. So, when we, another good example of how touch education happens along a continuum throughout the childhood, an example that I like to give people is, if you have, let's say, a 6-year-old child and a 2-year-old child, and you see the 6-year-old picking up the 2-year-old child and trying to hold him, and the 2-year-old is struggling and squirming and trying to fight, that's a great example of where we teach consent. Right. And it's not because the 6-year-old is, God forbid, an aggressor or an offender. It's because they're a child and they haven't yet learned how to respect people's body boundaries. And so instead of saying, oh, stop it, which just gives them the just vague sense that they're doing something wrong, right, or ignoring it, which doesn't give the 2-year-old a sense of body autonomy and safety, you point out to the 6-year-old, look at his face. Does it look like he's enjoying what you're doing? He's not enjoying what you're doing, right? You wouldn't like it if someone was trying to pick you up and you didn't want to be held, right? We have to put him down right now because we never, ever, ever touch someone when they don't want to be touched, right? That's part of sexual safety education, even though you never said anything about private parts right? By inculcating in so many different opportunities, ways of showing how we respect each other's body boundaries, how we respect our own body boundaries, where and when is appropriate to touch ourselves and other people, that's laying the groundwork. That's the foundation. So it almost becomes irrelevant, like at what point you teach about sexual intercourse, because there's that drip of constant like dialogue and information that kind of permeates the comfort level of, we can talk about any,
right.
Right.
You're laying the groundwork.
Yeah.
And you're setting the tone. Also like the classic example would be the child who's being tickled and says stop, and you respect that right away. Or the relative that has the yucky kisses and you don't make the child get kissed because they say, no, I don't like that. And you have a chance to say,
a movement.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, no, there's actually a movement to sort of make the baseline that we don't have relatives touching children. Like the assumption is like, there's no need for people to touch each other. If somebody wants a hug, you can say, oh, does anybody want a hug? And then you can offer the hug, but like not to just assume that because I'm related to this person and they show up twice a year for, the chagim or something, that means that your kid is definitely wanting to be touched by them. And again, that's another big generation gap issue.
Right.
That's something that comes up a lot in the conversations where you have these young parents who are idealistic and they're reading all this literature on it. And they're like, I don't want my aunts and uncles to like make my kids, sit on their lap and hug them, whatever. But it just feels so awkward and uncomfortable to set that boundary for a generation of people who just like, they don't get it. They don't understand. Right. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. I think also going to the doctor's office is another chance. I mean, this is really more on the personal safety, but I still think it's the same thing. I mean, I'm a general pediatrician and I just work it into every single visit that, before I do the exam. And I use actually the term private parts. I gave up trying to use the names. And this is a multicultural practice because I found that so many people were not comfortable. And I think it's more important for this to be modeling it being not a scary thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Private parts is actually a really benign euphemism to use, especially if, you're not necessarily someone that's familiar with the child yet, because, we have to take baby steps. And if they're not accustomed to trusted adults using the, explicit and anatomically correct terms, they could experience that as what we call, medical sexual trauma. So let's say like,
oh, wow.
Well, that would be like, let's say the little kid who was catheterized against her and held down, or, had to be, stripped naked for an emergency something. And, it felt very, very violated, even though there was no villain in the story because there was no official abuser, but her nervous system doesn't care, right? The nervous system registered it as I was violated. And so that's why it's so important to have, and thank God we do have so many more doctors and, the next generation of doctors who are, sensitized in terms of bedside manner. I know even for myself as a full grown adult, there's a certain element of apprehensiveness and vulnerability when you go to a doctor.
Right.
And it makes such a difference when they tell you like, okay, this is going to hurt a little bit, or this is what I'm going to do, or this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, versus when they just kind of come at your body and do the things they need to do to you without, any sort of like, finesse or explanation or reassurance, and even more so for children who are even, more helpless.
Right. Okay. So what else would you say are things that we can do that maybe we're not doing? Because I will have to say that even again, I'm in a multicultural practice. I have parents who say to me, now that I'm doing more of this, they'll actually have a moment to say, well, I don't know what to say to my kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know where to start.
That's a great place to start. I think just to acknowledge and to recognize, that the majority of people, and this is adults across the spectrum, religious and not necessarily religious. We're not necessarily, when you ask people, were you happy with the sex education that you got? The vast majority of people will say, no, it was inadequate. It was not enough. It wasn't good enough. And so just to know in the first place that that's the baseline, that we're starting at a deficit, to recognize that we're also individually, most of us, starting at deficits because we're so nervous about saying the wrong thing, because we're so awkward and uncomfortable about it ourselves, because we don't want to say the wrong thing in terms of our kids' psychological well-being, in terms of representing our values. People have this fear of like, oh, my kids are going to say like, oh, do you and daddy do that? All of these different concerns that, a lot of children will have, a lot of parents will have. So to me, it feels like, and this is my bias, but I feel like the beginning of the solution to most problems is education. Mm-hmm. And there are, if you go on my website, elishevaliss.com, I have a blog. I have over 100 blog posts, many of them dealing with sexuality and sex education and these topics, a ton of free content there. There are some books that I recommend. I think you said you were going to link it in the show notes, but Dr. Yocheved Dibao wrote a fantastic book, and it's not even so new. Like, I think, it's probably like 10, 15 years old.
So, it's interesting that you say that, because she came out with a second edition.
No way.
Yes. I think it was April 21.
Well, sorry, in 2021?
Yeah, April 21.
Okay.
I don't know by this time this is released, it'll still be on sale, but right now it's on sale on Amazon. I just bought it.
I am so excited. I have bought that book probably at least 12 times because I lend it out to people and I don't get it back and I don't care. I'm just so happy.
Okay, well, it's on sale on Amazon. I don't want to say for how much in case by the time this was released, it's up to its full price.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm so excited to grab it. So guys, that is a wonderful, wonderful investment. She did. I mean, I don't know the second edition, but if it's anything like the first edition, which I could understand why she needed to update it, mm-hmm. Just based on different developments. But, she did such an incredible job with that. And then there's like a skinnier book by
Sarah Diamond.
Yeah.
That's 2013.
Similar presentation, just a shorter,
much shorter
version of it. Yeah. So those are a really, really great place to start. My course is kind of a similar vein, not exactly the same material, but like the same idea of just like figuring out lots of different ways to confront our own parental hesitations, discomforts, history around the topic, and opportunities and times that we can, kind of teaching moments that we can sort of take advantage of that a lot of parents tend to shy away from because they feel awkward, they feel uncomfortable about it. So I think, reading and looking at different, the culturally sensitive stuff, the Jewish stuff is really, really nice. If you're comfortable looking at the general, secular material, there's a lot there too. Some of the ones that are written for little children are also, pretty innocent, pretty benign. If you, on my website also, if you, click the resources link, I have like a lot of different books linked and they're organized by category. So there's like mental health, there's marriage, there's sex for, couples, and then there's sex ed. And within the sex ed, there's Jewish sex ed and there's general sex ed. So, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to figure this out on your own. You don't have to hire a private therapist to teach you what to say. Mm-hmm. There's lots of material out there. There are podcasts. I think Joma did something, right? Didn't you do something on sex ed once? You did.
We did not do it for children. We've had webinars for adults.
Which, by the way, that is a great investment. Like meaning,
yes.
right? Like if you as a parent, so much of parental hesitation is a feeling of vagueness for yourself, right? Like if I don't ever feel like I was really educated well enough that I have clarity, even if you figured out sex with your own partner, right? Like let's say you bumbled along for a couple of years and you figured it out and it feels good now, whatever. But like if you don't feel like you know it clearly, biologically accurate, halachically accurate, all the stuff that you're kind of like fuzzy on, a good step would be like, watch the Joma seminar. It was like a multiple speakers, right? Like I think
they had two sets of panels.
Yeah, panels, right? And so even just like sort of exposing yourselves to that information from medical professionals and mental health professionals and people who really know their stuff, it will give you that confidence. Knowledge builds empowerment and confidence. And then somehow once it's on the brain, you have the opportunities to then, go ahead and share it in a more organic way with your children. You don't need someone to spoon feed you a script of, play by play. Here's what you say when they turn 2.5 versus when they turn 2 3/4,
But doesn't it feel like that for parenting books? I need to have the book, in front of me. I don't know the right words. I actually entitled this talk, how to talk to your kids about sex so they will listen and listen so they will talk. And it was a takeoff on the Adele Farber and Joanne Farber, her daughter,
Oh, I thought it was
books.
Faber Maislish.
Maislish?
Yeah.
I thought it was the Faber.
Yeah, Faber Maislish. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, the How to Talk to Kids Will Listen series.
Whatever. Anyway, so my daughter was reading one of them and she's like, Mom, how do you like remember what to say? Like, it feels like there's a script you have to memorize. Like, I feel bad for parents. There's so much pressure, right?
So I'll
like,
tell you, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
To say the right thing, to do the right thing. And what if you're wrong?
That's, by the way, another huge area of parental anxiety.
Right.
I think there is just such a deluge of parent education, for better and for worse. Like I was just telling a friend last week, I was saying, my kids are a little bit older. My youngest is 14 already. And so when I hear my colleagues who do parent education, talks and classes and articles, and I think to myself, like, ow, I just want to like rewind and correct all the mistakes that I made when I wasn't as knowledgeable. And, and my kids are wonderful and I love them. And I know that I tried my best, in every way that I could at every stage. But like, there's a quote that I love by Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better and then do better. Right. So
beautiful.
I love that one. And so a lot of people, so many of the messages I get from people are like, oh, my kids are already like, 9, 12, 16, like, is it too late? It's like, it's never too late. Like it's never, it's never too late to improve, right? There's always room to have better conversations. I have, there's a colleague that I know from social media. Her name is Bleemy Heller. I don't know if you've come across Bleemy's stuff. We did 2 Instagram lives on the topic. One was about sex education in general, and one was about sexual abuse prevention. And they're both, over an hour long, free content on her page. Her page, I think, is called Unconditional Parenting. I think one of them might be linked on my website also in the video section of it. But Bleemy is wonderful. She is a parent educator. And what I really, really like about her approach is, she calls it unconditional parenting, but what she does is she empowers parents to get in touch with their intuitive, empathetic, instinctual calm. And once you're in that zone of just feeling like I'm acting from my love, I'm acting from my care for my best interest of my child, then the words flow much more naturally, much more instinctively. And it's like you don't have to memorize what a parenting book told you to say. You're sort of like in that zone of like, what is my child going through right now? What is he or she feeling? What do they need to hear from me in this moment to help regulate the big little feelings, like the big young feelings that they're having, so that we can get through this challenge as growthfully as possible. And I think that some of the really nice parenting education stuff out there is more about kind of helping parents tap their inner wisdom. The same way we don't teach people, let's say in marriage education, we don't say, here's what you need to say to your wife or your husband in order to make sure that they feel loved. Now read out the script, there's not like a Hallmark thing, we sort of teach people how to access their own authentic, feelings and wisdom and empathy and understanding. And then the rest sort of flows. And I think the same is true for parenting. And I think the same is also true for sex ed. When we educate ourselves, then we educate others from a place of knowledge, right?
Right. It's also okay to say at the time, say your child asks you a question and you didn't expect it. To say a little something then, and then look up, some more information that might be, you're not sure what a child at a certain age needs to know, because a lot of, actual information part of sex education is developmentally age appropriate, and you might not know.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really important point. And I think whether we're talking about sex ed or any other kind of education, parents and teachers put a lot of pressure on themselves to have the answers.
Right.
And the majority of the time when kids come to talk to us, they're not even necessarily looking for specific answers. They want to be heard as much as they want to, hear us, very often even more. So a great answer when a kid comes to you with a question that you're not sure of the answer to is like, just to first of all, like, praise the fact that they came to you with that question.
Right.
Just like, wow, that's a really great question. What made you think of that? Right? Kind of like, cause it's just a great opportunity to make them feel good about something that they're doing. We want to encourage them to know they can come to us with anything. We want to know what they already know or have heard and what they're thinking in their own heads. Cause it could be that somebody already told them the information and you can just confirm yay or nay or correct the parts of it that are not correct. It could be that they have ideas and thoughts that they want to share with you. It could be that like where they're going with this, like, there's the classic like sitcom version of it of like, Mommy, where did I come
from?
Like, Massapequa.
That's what they really want to know.
Right. They just want to know what hospital was I born in, right? So, so that's like the joke version of it. But at the end of the day, there's absolutely nothing wrong and everything right with saying to a child, that is a phenomenal question.
Right.
And it really deserves a really good answer. And right now I'm in the middle of, cooking, or we have to run out, and it's, not a good time for me to answer it, but I totally want to spend some time discussing it with you. And then you buy yourself some time. Or if you honestly don't know what to say, you could say, it's such an important question that I don't want to just answer it. I want to kind of think about it and read up a little bit more, because what a wonderful skill to give children, the authentic and confident honesty of saying, great question, I don't know, let's learn it together. Right.
And if you say something and you made a mistake, it's also a great thing to model that I made a mistake. By the way, I looked this up. I found out better information.
Again, what a phenomenal life skill to teach children, to be able to, look, I misspoke. I said something and I learned something new or more accurate, and now I want to correct that. That's such a great relational skill to have, both in our interpersonal social relationships and as professionals or in academic environments. Like, it's so great to be able to say, oh, I was wrong, let's fix it, right? Without ego.
Right. But what I love most about this is telling your child, this is a topic we can talk about.
Yeah.
I'm okay with this. Yeah. Right. I think conveying that is important.
That's the bedrock, the bedrock. And whether we're talking about sexual safety or sexual education or sexual internal experience, I think it's so great when kids can come. And I've been getting more of this over the years, parents calling me and saying, my kid told me they're having fantasies. My kid told me they're masturbating. My kids, that there are different things that they're experiencing. And thank God we're just seeing more and more children who feel safe to come to their parents and say, this is what's going on for me. And parents who feel empowered to not shame their children, not brush under the rug, not say, go ask your mommy, go ask your daddy, just, I don't know, whatever. But say, I really want to talk to you about it, but I don't really know exactly what I want to say. Can I have some time to think about it? And sometimes they'll consult with a professional, and sometimes they'll consult one of these books or courses. There's great stuff out there. But I will say that when the answer is, I want to get back to you, I don't love saying, I'll tell you when you're older. Because I'll tell you when you're older, usually it registers as, you're never really going to hear about this, right? I'm not saying never say it. I think there are times where you can invoke, I'll tell you when you're older, but I prefer to throw a few crumbs of knowledge that are age appropriate and say, it's A, B, and C. And I'm going to tell you a lot more about that as you get older. We're going to talk more. Because I feel like it's almost unkind and giving the wrong message to shut it down completely. Again, we want to encourage kids that there's nothing that they can't come to us to talk about. And that's again for the safety piece of it and for the personal development piece of it. And even just in terms of just understanding what it is that people are talking about. Because another huge one that comes up a lot is when children discover pornography or explicit material, on the internet or at friends' houses or materials that they find, and again, like if they come to parents and the parents say to them, okay, so it's okay. Just tell me what you saw. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you're feeling. And the kid knows that this is a safe place to process it. Then, we can sort of like curtail the secrecy and the shame and the awkwardness that they're feeling, as opposed to it sort of like being this like stigma, taboo, we can't deal with it, which then it festers.
Right. I'm really glad you brought that up. And by the way, it was a great piece that you wrote for the 5 Towns Jewish Times.
Thank you.
I actually printed that out here. It's called, let me find it. It's called My Child Found Pornography. I can't find it.
Yeah. I think
my teen discovered pornography. What should I do? And this was also on your blog, I believe.
Yeah. The 5 Towns Jewish Times actually, they edited out the word pornography. They didn't tell me. I just saw the paper but it was like the title of the piece was like my kid found porn, my teen found porn or something. So pornography was like all over it. So every single time it said explicit material. It made me laugh. But that's another great example where using a communally sensitive euphemism could be like a decent substitute, even though it sounds a little silly.
Right.
Because everybody knows what they meant.
Intimacy versus sex.
On my blog, I say pornography, but, yeah.
Right. But at least you're conveying, at least you're talking about it.
Yes.
But I'm glad you mentioned that because, I find one typical approach is we're going to put filters. We're going to, not give our kids smartphones. And I think limiting and filtering are really good things, but not as the sole answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I always prefer educating over mandating.
Right.
And again, like you said, it's not that there's no place to create rules and boundaries and limitations. I think even the tech giants will talk about the value of pushing off giving their kids their own devices and their own social media accounts, as long as possible into middle school, into high school, if you can. The peer pressure makes that difficult. But again, depending on where you live and, how you align. But at the end of the day, the people who come to our offices with pornography addictions, with sexual preoccupation, with compulsive masturbation, all that kind of stuff, they span the spectrum regardless of how much they were quote unquote sheltered. And so that, again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to operate within, age appropriate norms and, values as far as what we as parents are trying to, give our kids the gift of an innocent childhood. But I think that education goes a lot longer than trying to insulate, as far as this stuff, especially in our world, because you might think that you're insulating or sheltering your child, but like, unless they're never going to leave your house, they're going to be exposed to other stuff. So they're better off being aware and being knowledgeable about what they're going to see rather than having to learn from other people in ways that may not be accurate or safe.
Right. It's a classic. Do you want them to learn from you or the street?
That's
and now
exactly.
The street and the internet is a whole other level.
Totally.
And this is really, internet safety is going to have to be a separate podcast because that is a huge topic.
Yeah, we actually have friends, they're socially friends of ours, but he is, this Dr. Eli Shapiro, who created something called the Digital Citizenship Project. And he did a tremendous amount of research. You know him?
No, I want to interview him.
You should interview him. He's a great guy.
I need you to help me with that afterwards, please.
I'll introduce you. Yeah,
that's exactly what I want to interview.
He travels around the country. I don't know if he goes outside the country, but he definitely has been like all over the country, and he does presentations for Orthodox schools, and he's got like real research, like data that he collected from like hundreds and hundreds of questionnaires of, Orthodox kids and parents and teachers on their perceptions of, internet use, what kids are discovering on internet, the level of honesty between kids and parents, how late the kids are using their stuff at night, like really, really great and important stuff. And he presented in a very clear way. So I'm going to put you in touch with him. I think you'll enjoy talking to him.
That is awesome. So what do you say to parents who are just feeling completely overwhelmed and terrified? When you talk about internet and pornography and child abuse, sex abuse, it just feels like you want to just go put your head back under the covers and not get out of bed.
Yeah. It's, that's another form of parental anxiety. It's, we know the challenges that are out there, right? The same way we know that the medical challenges and the health challenges and the mental health challenges and the social challenges, like there's so much that we could drive ourselves crazy worrying about with our children. But I think part of like finding our horizon of healthy parenting is sort of, my belief is that there are 3 ways we can engage with anything, any thought, any feeling, any problem, any relationship. And those 3 ways are either to let ourselves get bogged down and catastrophized by them, like just to get completely overwhelmed and shut down. That's number 1. Number 2 is just to take a more passive role, like whatever, I'm just going to have to let it be what it is because, there's not much to do. And the third way is to ask myself, okay, so given the situation, given reality as it is, what is the most helpful, healthy, empowered response that I can generate from within myself and within my own locus of control? And I think that's generally like a great way to sort of divide the mindsets and notice like when I'm feeling bogged down, what I call below that horizon of healthy thinking, just kind of feeling very helpless and overwhelmed and stressed out, any unwanted negative emotional experience when we're there, just to name it, tame it, understand this is what's going on for me, then pull it up to what we call on that horizon of healthy thinking, where I sort of say, okay, this is how it is, and me angsting about it isn't going to do much, right? And then sort of say, okay, like if I can just do some deep breathing, say to myself, what is it that I can do? Right? I can't protect my child from everything, right? I can't script everything, the same way you can't save your child from, a friend's like dropping them and not wanting to be friends with them anymore. They're going to come home and cry. You're going to want to just go and make that kid, no, just be friends with my kid. I don't want them to be sad. We can't control everything. We can't smooth the path for them, right? What we can do is we can build resilience. We can educate them. We can arm them with knowledge, with confidence, with body awareness, with emotional awareness, and make sure that those lines of communication between them and ourselves are wide open, so that when invariably these bumps along the way come up, when they encounter information that ideally they're going to be getting it from the, the better sources, trusted adults, And when they, encounter information that's less accurate or less, wholesome, they can come to us and say, I read this, I heard this, someone told me a dirty joke or whatever, and we can process it with them.
That is really good. I like that a lot. What if you just aren't there? What if you can't do it? I mean, not everybody's on the same even keel. You may be having your own other struggles and just don't feel like you have the capacity to do that. I mean, that's ideal. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But what if you can't?
Okay. So then we get the village, right? And I think that's really true. Again, when I think that sex ed is not so different from any other area of parenting, right? What do you do if you have a 6-month-old baby that's teething and you haven't slept in weeks and you have other kids who need your attention and you just don't have energy, right? You call your friend, your neighbor, your sister, your mother, your mother-in-law, right? Like this is, we take care of each other, right? We've all been there. We've all had that breakdown of I don't remember the last time I slept more than 4 hours in a row and I don't know how I'm going to get through the next day, right? I think most moms and probably a lot of dads can relate to that feeling. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's, physical overwhelm because of the, the mental load, the emotional load, the practical load, whether it's physical, medical challenges, life gets bumpy for people. And I think one of the things that I'm really, really proud of in terms of the Orthodox community is how much support we have for one another.
Right.
I think that all you need to have is on a WhatsApp chat to hear so-and-so, just had surgery, is going through a rough time, is, under the weather, what can we do to help? I'll take over the carpools. I'll make them dinner. We're so good at coming through for one another that way. So if that's what you're asking in terms of the short-term acute overwhelm crisis, I think that's good. But, if a person has their own trauma, their own sort of, compartmentalized area of incompetency with parenting, let's say with the sex ed piece of it, mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything so terrible about delegating. So, if let's say, you have your own issues with sex and you don't want to be the one to talk to your kids about it, but you feel like somebody needs to have this conversation with them and you have a sister that they're really close with, you can bring, Auntie Mary in to talk to them too. And assuming that you're there and it's okay. Again, that's not ideal. I still like for parents to educate themselves, but I understand the fact that we can't always do everything and demand everything of ourselves. And it's a process. We all just do the best we can at every stage of development, right? I remember I once had a rabbi who said something like, it's so ironic that we're expected to make the most important decisions of our lives when we have the least amount of experience wisdom, right. Right. What are you going to do for a living? Who are you going to marry? Raising children, this all happens when you're young and stupid. Why don't we all just wait till we're 65 and a little wiser to do all those things? But that's not how the system was designed. God knows that. And he just expects us to do the best we can.
Right. And there really aren't parent training courses before you become a parent. I mean, there's plenty of material out there.
Yeah. I've heard that some of the seminaries have started to introduce kind of gentle parenting, seminars to the post high school kids, which I think is kind of cute. But I always say
it's the little egg where they don't drop the egg.
Exactly. I always say learning about parenting or learning about sex before you become, a parent or sexually active is like learning how to swim on dry land.
Right.
Until you're in it, it's there are all these jokes about I was the perfect parent until I had kids,
Right. Right. But it's okay to make mistakes. I feel like we have so much pressure to be the perfect parent, right? But this myth of the perfect parent has got to go.
100%.
And I think that we're going to be making more and more progress over time. And I think as communities, we have to say, this is where we are right now.
Yeah.
We're a work in progress and we're going in the right direction.
100%. And also, what was considered really wonderful, ideal parenting a few years ago is now being criticized, in this generation, and not necessarily because everybody was doing it wrong then. And parenting is much more of an art than a science. And again, that's talking about sex ed parenting or all kinds of parenting. You can say the same comment or do the same intervention with 3 different children. And for one, it will be like, wow, that was life-changingly great for me. And another kid will be like, that was the worst thing ever. And sometimes even
Mom,
you're ruining my life.
and not all kids want to talk. Some kids are the ones who will tell you all kinds of stuff, and some of the kids will never tell you, ever.
Yeah, some kids are more expressive than others, but I think that as parents, we want to open the door. you know, and it's their choice whether they want to come in or not. And that's another issue that comes up a lot. Like when the kid is opening conversation and the kid has that stuff they want to ask about, in a way it makes it easier. It's hard because you sometimes catch you off guard, but then you can come back to it and they're receptive. The kids who are not as talkative and don't engage as much, those are the ones where you kind of don't really know what's going on inside their minds. But I still say, like, there's a certain amount of you want to keep saying, I love you, I believe in you to a child, even if they're not saying a whole lot of it back to you, because, we're kind of watering the garden of what we want them to feel about themselves and know that we feel towards them. And then, they're going to, all the flowers get the same water, but based on the seeds that they're going to grow into like the species of flower species, whatever, into the I
get the idea. It's beautiful.
Right.
And I think it's just the idea of having a greater comfort level and openness, which is something that you can work on.
Totally. And I also encourage parents to don't be afraid of sometimes they tell people embrace the awkward. Like if you are feeling uncomfortable and awkward about it, that's okay to share with your child, assuming they're older than preschool. But if your kid asks you a question, you say, that's a really terrific question. And I have to tell you, because I don't know so much about it, I feel a little uncomfortable and awkward talking about it, but I still think it's a really important conversation to have. So you may notice that I sound a little funny talking about it, but don't worry about it. We're still going to talk about it.
I love that, because I think for kids, when you don't say things, that can cause anxiety. But when you do, they're like, oh, okay, I feel like that sometimes. Feel like, oh, and we can even talk about that.
Yeah. Talking about that, it's hard to talk about things. It's such a great relationship modeling thing.
I love it. And we could talk forever, but I told you not more than an hour. We're hitting that hour. So I want to thank you so, so much for doing this with me. I want to mention one more time your website, elishevaliss.com. And people can, if they want to, find your course, Sacred, Not Secret.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It really was.
Thank you for all the important work that you do for the community and for JOMA.
And for you too. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
You will.
Thanks for listening to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and share this with your friends. For more information, check out our Instagram at JOMA_org. Check out our website, www.joma.org, that's JOWMA.org, or email us at health@joma.org. Thanks for listening to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and share this with your friends. For more information, check out our Instagram at JOMA_org. Check out our website, www.joma.org, that's JOWMA.org, or email us at health@joma.org.